he's going to be session chair. And this session focuses on legacy network reliability and risks. Just to give you a quick introduction about who Mike is. Mike has over 27 years of experience in the telecom space. He started his career at AT&T, moved on to Western Electric, and then to Lucent. He's managed a number of projects at Lucent, first packet network used for OSS, BSS systems. And these days he's focused on managing the extension of legacy telecom products. Mike, thank you.
Lucas, thank you very much for that introduction. Let me first start by apologizing. If you know me, I like to talk. So the reality is I got laryngitis on the flight out here. It was 50 years ago in 8th grade. That was the last time I had laryngitis. The funny thing is that I've really been waiting my entire life to give this talk, so there's some irony that I get laryngitis before this talk. If you look at my background, I've been preparing for this for literally the last 40 years. I started in AT&T long lines, if people remember that far back, in 1977. And my first project had to do with the transmission of data, analog data over a fax machine from Australia to New York City. So why Australia, New York City? In New York City, the Daily News during the winter months would basically send out on their front page a copy of a scantily clad woman in beaches in Australia, and that was analog data. My job was to move that telephoto general control office from 32 Avenue of the Americas to 811 10th Avenue. So it's ironic how the world has kind of shifted, and that I've spent a lot of time in legacy products. I worked on a lot of advanced technology in the optical space, and now I'm back to the legacy world again. Let me talk a little bit about the agenda. Really, we took the mantra of the communications, quality, reliability, and security to heart here. Now, we've listened to many talks today. The reality of the talks were focused on more of the next generation stuff, more about newer technologies, NFV, SDN, 5G. But the reality is, it's what's in today's network that matters. The embedded base is the significant amount of investment measured in tens, maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars. The key is how to extend the life of that network. Now, when you talk about extending the life of networks, you have to talk about the two main components, repair, and you have to talk about support. It's funny, when Spilios gave his talk, he was showing cables. I don't think there was any other talk that talked about cables, the day-to-day world of people who deploy networks, implement networks, maintain networks, and repair networks. If any of you guys were double E's, I think you could think back when you were dealing with, they used to give you these little kits that had resistors, capacitors, inductors. The resistors were color-coded. Well, that world, that equipment is still out there in the field providing traditional voice services and private line services. So the next few speakers will really get down and dirty. I mean, if you had to characterize us as a group, we're the mechanics. We're the guys that maintain your BMWs or maintain your Audis. Ironically, when you talk about legacy networks, you're talking about people that have older cars. That's the greatest analogy. So when you talk about old cars, you talk about, let's say, I usually ask this question of engineers. Most engineers drive either Toyota or they drive a Honda. What they want is a reliable car. They want a car that has the quality to drive well over 100,000 miles. Well, what do you do in a car that has 10 years, 100,000 miles, that really you're using it to get from point A to point B? Well, the fact is, most people would like to maintain that car and buy the next car when they're ready to buy it. Now, what determines whether or not you buy the next car? Can you get it repaired? What is the price to repair it? What's the reliability of the car? And issues like that. Now, here we are talking about, the fact is the legacy network exists today. What we're talking about, what can you do as a service provider or as an OEM to extend the life of legacy equipment? The reality is, I'm a big believer in product lifecycle theory. I was a double E, and before I graduated Brooklyn Poly, I realized I'm not a double E. That I really like the business aspect of it. Things really revolve around the financials. And I realized quickly that I really wanted to be a product manager. And I really noticed that with product lifecycle theory, everything has a product lifecycle theory. It could be cars, it could be people, it could be technologies, it could be civilizations. They have a beginning and an end. Roman Empire, Greek Empire, Spanish Empire, British Empire, they came to an end. Now, what could they have done to extend their lives, extend their empire, their reach that much longer? That's the question. The same question applies to networks in general. The irony is, in today's environment, all these things that they talk about in terms of market trends apply to any product. I'll argue, even though the legacy PSTN is reaching what people would call obsolescence, it doesn't go away. It never goes to zero. Even though the network is aging, even though subscribers are going off the traditional landline network, it doesn't go to zero. What I find is that vendors are exiting the business. Vendors can no longer afford to develop next generation products and maintain the old products. What is the impact on the service provider? That's the key question. How do you maintain your existing network when technology is forcing people to upgrade? Vendors, either by raising maintenance prices or forcing people to migrate. You have such a large embedded base out there. Now, the key is, can you support it? Can you repair it? Can you maintain it? Do you have the workforce, skilled workforce, to be able to handle those calls in the middle of the night? The other thing is, everything that we talked about today, and this is a warning, everything we talked about will eventually be legacy. Everything eventually becomes legacy. So this is a generic problem for all technologies at any point in time. This is a chart that I got from one of the magazines. It may not be correct in terms of the actual numbers, but it's the slope of the lines. Voice over IP is coming in. PSTN is going down. The reality is, as people migrate to voice over IP, that will become the next legacy technology. This technology that's in the network today is constantly evolving. What I want to point out is that most companies really don't focus on legacy products. They don't focus on the assets that they have in the network. It's basically more people, and this is not an indictment of the audience today, really fall in love with the new technology. They really do. Engineers love the latest and greatest technology. But the reality is, the old stuff is where most of the revenue and most of the margin is coming from a lot of these companies. People need to focus on the early warning signs, the ability to repair, the ability to support these products, and that is the key to extend the life cycle of these products. I spent a couple of years working with Fort Monmouth, which was the Center for Army Communications and Command in New Jersey. The reality is they opened a whole different world other than telecom for me. The reality is legacy is not a telecom problem. It's a worldwide electronics problem. The key is how to extend it. The Army is still using the B-52s. B-52 was introduced in the 50s, probably at the height of the Korean War, the end of the Vietnam War. It is still being used in today's environment. It is still doing its mission relative to the Middle East as well. The question is, how did they support this? How did they maintain it? How do they evolve it in today's environment? They figured it out. Now, the reality is, the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, has a hell of a lot more money than anybody else. They typically tend to throw money at these problems. And if you look at my next chart, they've actually earmarked $7.2 billion in a program to fight electronics obsolescence. They realize right now they were fighting two wars the last couple of years, Iraq and Afghanistan, with legacy products, Patriot missiles, arms that were built in the 70s and the 80s. They're fighting a war. Their key metric is not reliability. Their key metric is lives lost. The only way they were able to solve that problem was by throwing money at it. by doing last time buys, working with manufacturers, working with repair guys to make sure you can maintain those obsolete parts, either by harvesting, reverse engineering, improving repair, or migrating things to the newer technologies to keep the armament going. This is a real life problem. The Army is spending billions of dollars just on the Army communications part of it. Multiply that with the Air Force, Navy. When they put out an aircraft carrier has a 50-year life cycle. They still use steam turbines to eject the plane, and they're going to have to support that for the next 50 years. So telecom really has to look at the legacy business, look at the legacy network. And really the punchline of most of this talk is that legacy exists, but you have to manage it. You have to manage the life cycle of it. Most companies do not have infinite sums of money like the military does and the US government does, but they can throw a lot of money, a lot of manpower. If you look at companies today, they've got this battle between CapEx and OpEx. Cash flow, earnings per share, shareholders. Phone companies are financial instruments. I mean, that's what's changed probably over the last couple of years. Companies like Verizon, AT&T, they're diversifying away from the standard telecom. They're either going to be a pure wireless play, an over-the-top play, a media company. There's less money to maintain the existing network, and there's probably less money to generate additional services on top of newer technology. That is the reality of today's telecom world. I mean, it is a financially driven. I know Verizon probably better than most companies. The key guy at Verizon is the CFO. The CFO is calling the shots. If they can migrate people off legacy stuff, they will. But that impacts service quality and customer retention. This is a snapshot of what an old switch looks like. The days of life cycles lasting 30, 40 years is over. The reality of most of the stuff in the network was vintage Western Electric, vintage Nortel. Now you've got various players, vintage Ericsson, I should say, as well, and Stromberg Colson. It's still in the network. There is a finite life. I don't think you can extend the life of legacy products forever. There is a finite life as to when you can maintain that equipment going forward. I always like this chart, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it because Michael Plum from Precision lives this every day. What you're seeing in the network is an increase in failure rates. Think about it. Most of these boxes or units or chassis have fans, have filters, have disk drives, have power supplies. The disk drives have been spinning for 20, 30 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So anything that's electromechanical in nature is going to start failing. And what you're starting to see is that in typical life cycle, you have infant mortality, and then it kind of drops down significantly. You're seeing an uptick. You're seeing a significant uptick in end-of-life issues. So you're starting to get failures. And I'll predict, I'll make this my prediction. In the next 5 years, we're going to have a catastrophic outage in the network. Either because we can't get parts, or you have multiple failures, or you have untrained technicians. It will happen. It'll be on the order of magnitude of 9/11. You'll have a catastrophic outage. Because most people aren't looking at the legacy world. What do you need to do? My call to action is you got to look at what's in the network. Somebody has to look at the map of the network and look at what's legacy and what's not legacy. You have to look at what vendors are providing what products. When are they declaring an end of life? When are they declaring an end of sales or end of support? You've got to negotiate with them to be able to figure out when is it that you're able to migrate to the next generation product at your convenience, at your financial capability, not when they dictate. You really got to look at repair and support. The reality is, he's the youngest guy here. He's a baby. Most of the people in this business are 50 years and over. There's no question. Not spilliers. I meant Mike down there. Most of the guys in this business are looking to retire, are looking for a package. You're not going to get a young kid out of an engineering school to really focus in on TDM or PSTN or transport networks. It's not going to happen. So how do you maintain that network? It can be done. You need to extend it per your requirements in terms of when do you want to deploy new products and new services. The last couple of days, we talked about boxes on PowerPoint. Today, we're talking about real live boxes that have power and provide services. So really the focus has to be balanced between next generation, newer products, and what do you do with the old stuff, and how do you get it, how do you prevent that catastrophic failure? I'm not going to talk much about this. Actually, I had invited a Bell Labs fellow to give a talk on a model that they created for a European company. The European company, basically, probably the size of a small region within Verizon or AT&T. I think they had about 18,000 endpoints. It was predominantly a SONET transport network. They basically were starting to see significant failures in one of their optical units, way above trend. And they realized that something was going on, something was wrong with the network. They had over 100,000 cards in the network. Most of those cards were around 12 different product families from various manufacturers and OEMs. What they realized was that 35 cards were causing the majority of the problems and the outages. And that they realized if they didn't act quickly, that they would have a catastrophic outage and the network would come down. And most of the bank customers in that region of Europe were riding over this network. And probably 85% of their margin was based on this network. So what do good engineers start to do? They basically look at the data, start analyzing the data. Of the 350 card types in the network, they identified 35 cards that were causing the critical outages. So they developed a series of charts, basically looking at every single card, looking at their failure rates, trending them over time, looking at spares, looking at repair statistics, repair intervals. What they determined was, at some point in time, you can't get repaired and you don't have any spares on the shelf. And theoretically, that is the end of life of that network. What I'm suggesting is that this kind of analysis is really done on the legacy network. The data is there, and I know people were talking about data scientists. The key is to get that data and start analyzing it, and also start looking at the migration path. The European PT&T said, we could transition to any network in 18 months. We can't do it in 6 months. Before this, they had a 6-month life left on their network. They had to take drastic measures to start harvesting their own equipment, consolidating, building up spares inventory, working with repair vendors to shorten the interval, looking at component obsolescence management, working with their contract manufacturers to give them more time. So managing life cycle is really playing the time game. It really is. So you've got to develop the plan and the business case.